Welcome to Trade and Tariff Tuesdays. We're back with another edition of Avalara's webinar series discussing the Trump administration's tariffs and their impact on trade compliance. We started this weekly series back in February, so if this is your first time, welcome. If you've joined us before, welcome back. Just a friendly reminder that Avalara cannot provide legal or tax advice. On your screen is our safe harbor policy. Please take a moment to review. We're recording today's event and you'll receive the recording later today. The console you're looking at can be customized. Feel free to move or resize the windows. The additional resources section contains a lot of great related resources, including the slide deck. And there are several ways to engage with presenters and attendees today. First, if you have any questions, please submit them using the Ask a Question box. We'll save time at the end for Q&A, and we may also be sprinkling them in throughout the presentation. You may also submit troubleshooting questions in the Q&A box, and I will take care of that for you. Second, you can join our attendee chat. Click the icon at the bottom of your screen with the two chat bubbles, and the attendee chat will appear. We encourage you to introduce yourself, network, and discuss today's topic. Third, you can react to the presentation by clicking on the emoji icon and reacting. Last, today's webinar continues on with a 45-minute format to save a little bit more time for audience Q&A. And since this session is less than an hour and intended to be interactive and responsive, it is not eligible for CPE credit. Avalara's customer conference, Crush, is going on tour, actually beginning this week. Check events.avalara.com for details. Now let's meet today's presenters. Patrick Frith, Senior Director of Growth at Cross-Border at Avalara. We are also joined by Steve Norris, VP of Digital Commerce at Logicbroker, one of our partners. And then a surprise speaker today. We did not think he was joining us, but Craig Reed. And Craig is our General Manager at Cross-Border. He is with us today, not featured on this slide, but he'll be joining us.
All right. Well, yeah, you don't have to endure my picture on there. We got Patrick and Steve on there. The reason I didn't think I'd be able to join is I'm actually in Rome at a trade show, so I wasn't sure of the timing, but it worked out and I was able to join, which I'm really happy about because we're changing it up a little bit. We're really thrilled to have Steve Norris with us, who, as Regina mentions, the VP of Digital Commerce at Logicbroker. Steve, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's not every day that I get to spend 45 minutes chatting with tax and cross-border experts, so I appreciate it. Sorry I didn't wear the orange polo, didn't get the memo on that one, but excited to be here. Steve Norris, VP of Digital Commerce at Logicbroker. I own our solutions engineering and customer success practice, but maybe more importantly, I've spent 20 plus years in e-commerce supply chain, e-commerce fulfillment technologies. For those that have joined today, one, I want to make sure I thank our partners Avalara for including me in this. It's a really interesting time to be alive with all these tariffs that are in place. But if you haven't heard of Logicbroker before, we're a platform that's used by retailers, distributors, and brands to operate some of the largest dropship marketplace and wholesale procurement programs in the world. So we work with organizations that you would have heard of like Home Depot, Walgreens, 1-800-Flowers, Victoria's Secret, and Samsung. And what's interesting to our conversation, what I hope to bring to the discussion today is because we operate these programs, we sit on top of such rich and quality data about products and inventory availability and order fulfillment trends and order details that can help lead to maybe a broader conversation a little bit later on as we start to look at how these tariffs are impacting consumer behavior and business buying.
Yeah, that's, that we kind of touched on that, some of that stuff in earlier webinars, although, to your point, we don't have nearly the depth that you do. So really excited to have you aboard and thank you for joining us. Look forward to your section. So we are going to go through the latest news and trade compliance, and then Steve's going to take us through the impact of tariffs on consumer shopping and business buying, which I'm really excited to hear, and I think you guys will really enjoy. Then we're going to talk about the implications to your business of everything that's going on, how you can take action with both Logicbroker and Avalara. And then we will do some Q&A at the end, time permitting. We do try to sprinkle questions in as we go if it's sort of related to what we're talking about. So So don't be shy about using the Q&A box. And we also have somebody in the background answering questions as well. So we'll try to get to those as much as we can. First of all, we are going to start with a poll question. We typically do that. So the poll question is, what is the proposed cumulative tariff rate on Chinese imports entering the U.S. based on last week's U.S. and China trade discussion? So I'll flip now to the answer box. So give everyone a little bit of time to do that. It's actually been, it's been a little quiet on the news front. There hasn't been quite as much consuming the news cycle as there has been with obviously the conflict in the Middle East, but it's always topical and there's always stuff going on. So let's see what everybody answered here. Well, most of you were right. The answer is 55%, right?
Yeah, it's great. People are paying attention to what's happening, that's for sure. So if you remember, up until these discussions, it was from China to the US, it was 145% plus, depending on what tariffs your products were carrying. And then from US to China was 125%. So as correctly pointed out, the 145 has dropped down to 55 plus. And that comprises 10% baseline, 20% fentanyl, and 25% from prior era tariffs that were put in place by the Trump administration before. So China's dropped down to 10%, going the other direction. So yeah, people are on the ball.
They're on the ball. So let's talk a bit about the latest news in the trade and tariff war. It all started with Liberation Day, didn't it, Patrick?
Yeah, that's right. And we are getting very close now to the 9th of July, which is when that 90-day pause is lifted. So we currently sit at that baseline of 10%. We saw yesterday the UK and the US pretty much inked their deal, whilst in Canada. So that is automotives, that is from the UK into the US, that's automotive, steel, and aviation. No word on pharmaceuticals. That is presumably in the detail or is yet to be finalized. And then going the other way, it's ag. It's US access to the UK market for agricultural products, for beef, this sort of thing. So we're seeing deals shape up, but there's still many to go. Craig, we're just a few weeks, short weeks away now from July, and we've still got more deals.
Yeah, and you kind of wonder if the UK example might sort of serve as a template going forward. I know the news, I'm Canadian for those of you who don't already know. So the news in Canada coming out of the G7 summit, which was held just outside of Calgary in Kananaskis, is that Mark Carney and Trump had a long meeting about Canada-US trade, and that there are some proposals on the table that both sides are taking a look at. So expect to see some more news coming out of Canada. But another sort of news item is what's happened with the court rulings, right? So we did see some challenges to the Trump tariffs, specifically that they're using the Emergencies Act to enact the tariffs. The Court of International Trade said they were not allowed to do that. The Federal Appeals Court stayed that, and we are, I guess, waiting for ultimately, I think we're gonna have a trip to the Supreme Court, and we'll see what the Supreme Court has to say about it. Although I believe that Howard Lutnick is on record as saying that there are many other ways that they can implement the tariffs. So ultimately, we'll see what the court rulings have in terms of an impact. So what does that mean? Where are we now? As we outlined, as Patrick mentioned, with China, we're at 55%. The interesting thing to me there is that 20% of that 55 is the fentanyl tariff, which the Trump administration has said if they are satisfied, quote unquote, with where China gets to on fentanyl, that they may drop that 20%. So remains to be seen whether we ultimately end up at 35 or we're going to stay at 55. And of course, it's 10% coming the other way. I mentioned Canada, but Canada and Mexico are both in the same boat effectively. They're anything that's USMCA compliant, meaning majority made or transformed in Canada and Mexico, is at a 0% tariff. Any non-USMCA compliant goods are going to continue to see a 25% tariff. And then the non-USMCA compliant energy goods, so from Canada, potash, et cetera, is at a 10% tariffs. And as I mentioned, we'll see what happens with the discussions between Trump and Carney. The general tariff on everyone else is sitting at 10%, with the exception of steel and aluminum, which is at 50%, and with the exception of the UK, which has a different tariff, 25% on automobiles and 25% on oil and gas. If you buy it from Venezuela, that's going to be another penalty, although I'm still confused about how that ultimately is going to be passed on. Reciprocal tariffs, we mentioned Canada is still holding the 25% tariff on about $60 billion worth of US goods. China, again, has the 10% tariff. So that sort of sums up where we're at. As we mentioned, the 90-day pause is almost over, so a lot remains to be seen. July 9th is the deadline, which is coming up quickly. Ultimately, gentlemen, I don't know if they're going to push it or not, but I expect to see a lot more news coming out shortly.
Yeah, I mean, I think just looking at the news over the past couple of days, right, you're starting to see some of these conversations start to heat up a little bit. So I think there'll be more news kind of as we go through the next few weeks. I think the China tariff situation, while it seems like 55% is maybe a reprieve from the 140%, I think in a lot of cases this might just be being perceived as like, hey, somebody's going to get hit by a truck at 55%, but it might just be a little bit slower moving in some cases. So it'll be interesting to see how this overall plays out. I think the UK announcement, Patrick, puts you in good shape for that Rolls Royce you were planning to buy. It looks like it won't be as high tariffs on that moving forward.
That's very well, the other big piece of news, of course, was the end of de minimis for China and Hong Kong made goods. Again, made goods, not shipped from, but made there. That's where there's a ton of package volume. You can see the volumes there on the left-hand side that were coming into the States under $800. That is no longer. So anything under $800, if it's non-postal, is subject to all applicable duties. If it's a postal shipment, it either has a flat duty rate of 54% or $100 a package. And also they have to show all their proper reporting that typically would accompany a commercial import. So HS codes, declarations, country of origin, et cetera, are going to be required for any of those imports. The other sort of salient piece on de minimis is that there's actually a bipartisan move, and it's in the One Big Beautiful Bill, actually, to eliminate de minimis entirely by July 1st, 2027. So it could be going away for all countries, which is another big development.
Yeah, and I see a question there, Craig, before we move on to the next segment. I see a question from Molly asking if vendors are required to show proof of the country of origin when passing along tariffs. At the moment, that's not a requirement. It is in some countries that there are requirements to prove certificates of origin is what they're referred to as. At the moment, that isn't a requirement, but I would have thought at some point it is not off the table for that to become an additional submission with your customs entries, proving where the actual product was made to avoid people getting around that China, Hong Kong origin, and trying to sort of create an illusion of it being produced somewhere else. I think it's a consideration for the future.
Yeah, and I mean, definitely don't be monkeying with your country of origin, because the CBP is on the lookout for that. There's been a bunch of, I've seen LinkedIn, different strategies, quote unquote, for routing goods through third countries to avoid those tariffs. That is not compliant. If it's made in China, it's made in China. If it's made in Hong Kong, it's made in Hong Kong, and that means that it's subject to the tariffs. So be careful with your country of origin. We'll talk a bit more about trade import requirements. But first, we're going to get to Steve's section, which I'm excited to hear about. So Steve, take us away.
Yeah, and again, thank you guys again for having me. Just wanted to share some insights that we've gathered across the wide variety of retailers, distributors, and brands that we connect, and hopefully generate a little bit of conversation around this while we're here, right? Like what we're seeing from a Logicbroker perspective, what we're seeing in the market is that some of these categories are disproportionately impacted by tariffs, right? When you think about, I like to group tariff exposure into kind of 3 categories, like who's got high exposure, who's got moderate exposure, who has low exposure, right? People with high exposure tend to be folks that are in like toys and vertically integrated apparel and hardware. They tend to be suffering the most right now, right? Those categories have a higher reliance on manufacturing that happens kind of outside of the US and in high tariff regions. One of our customers in particular had such an impact to their business that they've actually are now calling some of the tariffs that are in place a baby tax, right? They're a baby, they're a baby retailer, right? They took out a full-page ad in the Washington Post, right? That's a pretty big deal, and basically just said, hey, babies deserve love and not tariffs, right? So, Craig, Patrick, I don't know if you guys have any kids. I do not. However, apparently the average parent spends about $20,000 on their kid in the first year, and most of those products are up 30%, and 99% of things like child safety seats are manufactured in China. So those tend to be folks that are looking for new opportunities, whether that's in thinking about rethinking where some of these products are manufactured, or finding suppliers of like or similar product that are in lower tariff regions. We also see folks that just generally have like moderate exposure, right? These are folks like in appliance or in sporting goods where they have some reliance on things like component parts that get manufactured overseas, but they do a lot of the final assembly here in the US. And we see a lot of that happening. And then like the low exposure categories that we see tend to be like jewelry and industrial supplies, right? Like, good news, Patrick, like that jewelry that your wife has been wanting, very low tariff rate on those types of products. So you shouldn't see too much of a markup on that if you're in the market and looking, right? The other thing that we're noticing is that like in industrial supplies, there tends to be lower impact because like these B2B markets aren't generally driven, they're driven more by availability than they are driven by the pricing component. So just a couple things that we're seeing, that certain categories are being impacted disproportionately.
Yeah, the toy thing's interesting. I'm busy trying to get my kids off payroll though, so I'm not buying toys.
All right. Love it. The other thing that we're seeing is like, obviously not every business is impacted, and sometimes the size of the business indicates how likely they are to have larger impacts from tariffs, right? Like, for example, one of our clients that we work with is a brand that's almost 100% reliant on China for manufacturing, right? And during that like 140 whatever percent tariff rate that was in place, right? They started to put pause on new projects. They started looking at duplicative rules and thinking about kind of layoffs, because it's just not easy for a small and medium-sized business to just like turn around and manufacture somewhere else, right? The tooling, the costs that are involved in that are pretty high. And so these are people that are generally coming to folks like a Logicbroker to figure out how can they expand the assortment that they have to be able to sell complementary products to maybe some of their higher tariff products without taking an inventory risk. Or on the other side of it, you have these large enterprise brands, right, that built resiliency into their supply chain, maybe during COVID, maybe before that can more easily shift their exposure. So they're saying, hey, maybe I'm manufacturing in China, but also in India and Bangladesh and in Vietnam. They can change their tooling pretty easy to keep up with demand, to move more manufacturing into lower tariff regions. Like, these are the two opposite sides of this spectrum and how people are being impacted. But I think like from an audience perspective, you're probably looking at this and saying, I'm not the one on the left or the one on the right here. I'm in like this messy middle, right? And that's like the majority of the people that we're talking to, right? And what's interesting, I think, in this messy middle is what I'm seeing in the market is actually a lot of inaction, right? Like people maybe holding their breath and hoping that this kind of goes away sometime soon, and like crossing our fingers, crossing our toes, that's going to happen. Or maybe they just don't know where to start, right? So for instance, I would say like, Craig, Patrick, if you'd have bet me $100 on January 1st, what I would see across the Logicbroker network of distributors and brands and retailers, I'd have bet you $100 I would have seen a large uptick in new suppliers being onboarded onto these retail programs that are in lower tariff regions or are simply manufacturing here in the States, right? If you'd have taken that bet from me, both of you guys would have had $100 more to spend at Duran Duran last night. So if you'd have taken that bet from me, you would have won, right? Now, what do I see, right? In that space is, yes, there is some inaction. I think some of it is people just waiting to see how this all plays out, right? Which I think is an okay position to have. But I think a lot of people that I'm talking to don't know where to start. So what we've done is, and Logicbroker, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, we've released a tariff playbook, and we released that today. And you can access that on the Logicbroker website. We'll show you a link here in a little bit. But in that tariff playbook, you'll find some strategies that your business can implement to help you with tariffs and eliminating some of your tariff exposure by finding suppliers of similar products that you may sell today that are in lower tariff exposure regions or manufactured here inside of the US. So we've vetted a large swath of suppliers that have raised their hand and said, hey, yes, we want to be discovered by the folks that are on our Avalara call, and we'll make that available to you guys on the Logicbroker website so that you can download that and look at that as a way of being able to take that first step. But I thought it would also be helpful to really talk today just briefly on some of the trends that we're seeing. So, we have a lot of insights around how consumers shop, but also how businesses buy, right? Many of the programs that we operate are B2C. Some of those are B2B, right? So what we're seeing kind of across the swath of both of these is really like the average cart size is continuing to increase. So people are buying more products, but what we're seeing is that the cadence of which they buy those products is coming down, right? And we actually saw this before. We saw this during like the COVID era buying experience, right? Where people were saying, hey, I'm going to move from buying kind of just in time to I'm going to buy just in case, right? Like I'm going to hurry up and buy stuff while there's a reprieve on some of these tariffs in order to be able to bring products in for the holiday season, right? Like I was talking with somebody last week that said they generally don't see Christmas items coming into ports at this time of the year, but people are buying it now while there is a reprieve. So we're seeing a lot of that. And we're seeing a lot more of that cart being fulfilled by a drop shipping community. And the reason that is these retailers and distributors don't want it. The worst thing you can do is like buy these high tariff products and then they sit there and they collect dust, right? Like you don't want to have these like high tariff laden goods sitting in your warehouse. So some of the organizations that we worked with, like specifically a health and beauty retailer we worked with, they've actually moved the vast majority of their e-commerce fulfillment. They've taken out of a distribution center, shut that distribution center down, and now fulfill a large portion of their assortment through drop shipping or directly from the store so they don't end up sitting on inventory for a long period of time. The other thing that we've seen is some preemptive stockpiling, right? Now, while certainly this isn't the toilet paper crisis of 2020, right? We're seeing people order well in advance. Right. So we're seeing a lot of folks try to get those orders in. Again, many holiday products tend to be manufactured overseas as well in high tariff zones. So we're seeing folks start to buy kind of in advance of that and start to stockpile products. We saw this same thing in 2018 and 2019, where there was a bit of a trade war happening at that time between US and China. So we're seeing a lot of history repeating itself in these scenarios where it might seem like there are areas of instability, right? And I would tell you that the last thing that we've seen is we see a lot of risk-adverse shopping. So one of the things that we measure across our platform is how many unique products are being ordered, right? What we're seeing is that consumers, and in some cases businesses, are really starting to focus on buying that core assortment and the core things that are adjacent to that assortment, right? And they're not so worried about like the tail end of these products that are available, right? Like it's a really bad time right now if you're a grocery retailer to be trying to sell laptops to people. It's probably not the best thing for you to be doing today if you're a hardware retailer and you're selling mountain bikes, right? You're not going to have a lot of success in that. You probably didn't before, but you're definitely not having a lot of success in that right now. But it is like a really good time to be like a pet supply retailer that is expanding the large amount of pet supplies that you have. So those are a few of the things that we see from a Logicbroker perspective. Hopefully that has given our listeners today a little bit of insights into the market. And again, we've released, and we'll talk about here in a little bit, we'll send you the direct link, but Logicbroker is releasing a tariff playbook that you can actually find right after we've completed our call today. And the nice part about that is it gives you more concrete definition of things that you can take action on now and later, along with a list of suppliers that may be able to help you in the long run and reach your profitability targets for the year that might be in risk, or your revenue targets that might be at risk.
Well, wow, thanks, Steve. That's really, really interesting stuff. I thought, the difference between the SMB and the enterprise and what's going on there is very interesting. In action, you mentioned that, which is, consistent with what we're hearing from our customers, but also some really interesting things that I hadn't even considered, like focusing on your core or your niche and getting rid of niche products, stockpiling, effectively trying to create certainty out of uncertainty is what kind of jumped out to me. So thank you. And again, for the audience, we wanted to give Steve enough time, so we're going to go a little quicker through the rest of the presentation. But we will have the materials available at the end. So why don't we talk about implications to your business? We like to call this the 4 pieces of global trade: de minimis, country of origin, tariff code classification, and declared value. Those things all interact and are critical in understanding what your costs are going to be, what your customers' costs are going to be, what your requirements are for reporting. De minimis, we talked about that. So that's the level at which duty and tax begins to apply. That's different for almost all countries in the world. So you need to know for the country you're importing to what the de minimis rules are. Country of origin, again, this is not where it was shipped from. People always get this wrong. So country of origin is where it was made or substantially transformed. And there are very specific rules around how you define that country of origin. Make sure that you have correct country of origin for your products. Tariff code classification, or HS codes as they're commonly called. We'll talk a bit more about that, but that's really what describes the product in a numeric way. They're consistent up to 6 digits, but they're 10 digits long typically, meaning that every country has a different 4 digits appended to the back of those 6 digits. So it's really important to know what the correct tariff codes are for your products. We'll show you a demo of one of our tools to figure that out. And then declared value. So declared value and the country of origin and the tariff code are all going to interact to determine what duties you're paying. So make sure you understand what your declared value is and that you're not underreporting your declared value. All right, let's go on to the trade impacts. This is some interesting stuff, Patrick, that just came out on what the trade deficit changed to.
Yeah, so huge drop in the import of goods. This goes back to the point you made, Craig. Also, Steve, you mentioned inaction. So it had been riding high. You can see from the graph here, it had been riding high towards the end of last year, beginning of this year. But then there was that sudden drop, okay, and it's backing up everything that we have seen. The inaction, the freezing, seeing what's going to happen next. However, when we get this data refreshed, we're going to be in, because you see it goes back to April here. But when we start seeing May and early June, I think we're going to see that spike up again because of the stockpiling. The stockpiling that Steve mentioned, getting it in that 90-day window, which of course now we're almost coming to the end of. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects the trade deficit of the US going into the rest of the year.
Yeah, I thought another interesting aspect of what's going on now is all of the trade disruption around rare earth minerals. I think, you know, China's leverage effectively is rare earths, because most of the rare earths or refined rare earths are made in China, and that has had a disruptive impact on supply chains for a large number of industries, particularly in electronics and automotive, et cetera, where access to rare earths is critical. So, and it takes a long time to develop refining capacity for rare earths, let alone mining them. So that's not going to change anytime soon, which, you know, may be how the China trade war was addressed in the first place. But that'll be interesting to monitor as well. The cost pressures, and you know, this is mounting across all different industries. Steve showed some of the under the covers aspects of this, but we're seeing some rising costs and price hikes, as Steve mentioned, supply chain revamps, also as Steve mentioned, layoffs and restructuring where workforce reductions are happening, cash flow and margin compression that are being reported, particularly on earnings calls. So, you know, what does that mean as these tariffs are reinstated, longer lead times, and renegotiating contracts as all these suppliers react to this volatility. And again, the shrink in basket sizes and increased return rates. Steve mentioned that as well. So, you know, these are all things that are happening in the industry that are changing. Like, all this is changing very, very quickly, and businesses are needing to react. So how are businesses reacting? Patrick,
Yeah,
how are the businesses reacting?
Yeah, just a few stats here. The Calvin Klein one is a little startling that we've got it up there first. The decrease in annual profit outlook by Calvin Klein of 65 million, attributed to the cost implications of the tariffs. So, you know, we're already seeing companies beginning to report it. And of course, the restructuring and the layoffs, we mentioned that in the previous slide. Volvo, obviously automotive, huge impact, 3,000 individuals there. And I think the other one of note on here is the Lululemon. So a lot of it is manufactured in high reciprocal tariff countries, and it's had a direct impact, 20%. You can see the direct impact on their stock.
Wow. Yeah. And, you know, there are steps, though, that folks are taking and can take to react to this supply chain uncertainty. One is, and again, Steve's covered a lot of stuff. So diversification of shipping carriers or sources of supply. Steve mentioned a move away from drop shipping, which I thought was really interesting. Automating your global trade compliance. That's something that we do. We're going to talk a bit more about how we can help you with that. Working with your customs broker to lean on their expertise, although I'll caution that, you know, we're at a trade show with brokers recently, and they are inundated and working 24/7. So they're very, very busy right now. So be careful how much you want to rely on them. Make sure your product details are compliant. We mentioned the 4 key components of global trade that you need to keep aware of. And then build some inventory to absorb short-term headwinds, probably a little easier for some of the enterprise companies, and not so much maybe for the smaller guys that, again, Steve mentioned that, but you know, there's the big group in between as well, that may have some options there. So with that, how are you planning to adjust your supply chain because of all this uncertainty? Are you diversifying suppliers, switching to local, investing in new trade technology? Are you rethinking your distribution strategy, or something that we haven't mentioned here? Or maybe you don't know yet. You can actually select multiple of these. So just to give us and everyone else on the call, could you please just take a moment to select what you're doing? We actually keep track of this from week to week, so will be interesting to see how things change. All right, we'll go to the next. Whoops. Oh, okay. So 28. Wow, it's it looks like most of the audience is actually looking to. Well, I don't know yet is number one, 52%. But so basically half are diversifying and half are just don't know, which was kind of back to the idea of inaction that Steve mentioned. There's just inaction because folks are just waiting it out. But those that can, it looks like are diversifying and switching to local. So that's interesting and consistent with what we have seen in the past. Another poll question: what are your plans for the increased costs from the global tariff on your goods? Are you going to pass them on to your customers by raising prices? Are you going to include a tariff surcharge, or are you going to absorb the cost? Probably different depending on how big your business is, or are you doing something else? You can select multiple of these as well. So if you could take a moment to do that, we would appreciate it. And we'll not only share the results of this poll, but we're going to show what folks have answered in the past as well. So let's move on to the answers here. Wow. So wow, that's really interesting. So passing on additional costs to the customer is by far and away the most popular strategy, including a tariff surcharge, which I guess is similar. Maybe those two things are one and the same. Only 20% are absorbing the cost. And it looks like there's a very small proportion that don't know what they're going to do yet or are doing something else. So passing on the cost is definitely the most popular. It's actually the highest number we've seen so far, which is really, really interesting. So it looks like, some of this is settling into the economy maybe, and or folks have exhausted their options for inventory. So, well, let's talk about how businesses can keep up with these challenges, Patrick.
Yeah, sure. So it's law, okay? So the tariffs have been changed. They're in law. They were signed in through executive order. So therefore, non-compliance can result in all sorts of consequences. The most obvious one, obviously, is delays, okay? So disputing the amount that's owed, arranging the finances to pay the additional tariff that's owed when it enters the country, and of course, deviating from those four horsemen, the four jigsaw pieces that Craig presented earlier, the declared value, the country of origin. These can attract penalties and fines. Okay, so the CBP have got the power to do that. So you don't want any of that. You don't want penalties, you don't want fines, you don't want delays. Only way you can avoid all of that is through compliance, making sure your HS codes are right, your declared value right, your country of origin is correct, so on and so forth. And then your duty. You need to have an idea what this duty is, the duty that will be imposed. You don't want to be paying too much. You don't want to be paying too little. You want to be paying bang on the tariffs that have been imposed on your products from the countries of origin that you're bringing them in from. And then, of course, making missteps along the way is just going to add cost to your supply chain. You're going to have emergency situations. Your customer service lines are going to be ringing off the hook. So again, you don't want these indirect additional costs and problems, which ultimately your customers don't want to experience. So so everyone's in the same boat. We all are struggling with this. Okay, and the compliance. That's all I can say about that, Craig.
Well, thank you, Patrick. Steve, how can folks take action with Logicbroker?
Yeah, so immediately after this call, you can go out to info.logicbroker/tariff-playbook. You'll see this also on our homepage, but you'll be able to go and download the tariff playbook. What we try to do with these playbooks is giving you real actionable things that you can execute on quickly versus just kind of hypotheticals, right? So we've done a nice job of making sure that it's very actionable for your organization. Would encourage you to download that, review it, and reach out if there's anything that Logicbroker can be doing to help as you look at ways of diversifying your supply chain and product mix.
Great. Well, I'd encourage everyone to take advantage of that. It's a great resource. For our part with Avalara, we do a few different things. We calculate duties and taxes in a variety of different ways. We have different calculation engines. We have tariff code classification tools. We're going to show you a demo of one of those in a moment. But there are others. We have many different ways that you can consume them and that we can provide your tariff codes to you. We also do trade restrictions management, so we can make sure that anything that you're importing or exporting is compliant, that you're not sending things to countries that you should not. So those are all things we can help you with, but we'll show you a demo of, which is, this tool is a little more amenable to a demo. So this is our self-serve AI-based tariff code classification tool. So we'll show you a demo of that. So if we could roll that, Regina, that would be great.
Welcome to the Avalara Tariff Content Classification Tool demo. Click to learn how this tool can accurately classify your products. First, choose the country of import. In our example, we will use the US. Click to proceed. Next, select the country of origin. In our example, we will use China. Click to proceed. Next, let's describe our product. Click to proceed. Now, we are ready to classify. Click to proceed. The tariff classification tool needs to know a few more details. Click to select the upper material. Select the lower material. Click to proceed. We've now reached an HS. Click to drill down to reach the HS10. Since our product is a men's golf shoe, click to drill down. Since our product is not welt footwear, click to drill down. We have reached the HS8. Click to find the HS10. We have now reached our HS10. Click to see rate description. Here we can see the total duty amount for this product. This totals 28.5% general rate plus 125% punitive rate, which equals 153.5%. This concludes the demo.
All right, that actually preceded the change to the tariff, so we'll update that. But you can actually get a free demo of that tariff code classification tool, a 14-day limited offer. If you are interested in that, please click yes to the following poll question. I'll give you a couple of moments to do that. So we are running out of time, so I'll move us through the rest quickly here. So please let us know if you would like a free trial. If you would like to talk with an expert, an Avalara expert, about your global trade compliance challenges, you can do that as well. So let us know if you would like to talk to someone. We'll get someone in touch with you right away. So I'll give you a few seconds to respond to that. And then finally, would you like to talk to a Logicbroker expert about your global trade compliance? So Steve will put them in touch with someone at Logicbroker, I assume after the call, and we'll have someone from Logicbroker reach out. All right, let's give everyone a few moments for that. All right, I think we have time for maybe one question.
Yeah, I think Jerry did a great job of getting back to the questions as they were asked. There was one here, I'm not sure if it was replied to, from Helen about how to avoid anti-dumping tariffs on goods from China. Well, there is no avoiding it. If your product is classified as one of the products which is subjected to anti-dumping, then there is no way around it. It is that's the tariff you have to pay, including the anti-dumping. Yeah, there is no unfortunately there's no way around it. That's black and white.
Yeah, and well, we had time for one question, but thank you, Jerry, for doing that in the background. There are a bunch of resources on the Avalara website. Won't go through them here, but this you will get a copy of this presentation afterwards. So those are all hot links. You can click on those. And I believe the Logicbroker link probably is there as well. You'll get the information on how to get access to the resources that Steve mentioned. So that wraps up our latest episode of Tariff Tuesdays. Thanks again, Steve, for joining us. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much to our speakers, and thanks to everyone else for joining us today. Just a couple of things as I take us out. Join us at one of our upcoming webinars, avalara.com/webinars. You can check those out. And that is all the time we have for today. As Craig mentioned, we have an email that'll be going out within the next 24 hours, and it will contain a link to the deck and additional resources. And we hope to see you again next week. Thank you.